Yo, what's up everyone? It's Beyond Hogwarts, and today we're checking out what if Rhea rescued Harry from cupboard at age 5 and Titan Mother made him king above all Olympians. Drop a like if you're hyped, subscribe for daily content. Let's get this story started. Chapter 1, What the Earth Remembers. The cupboard beneath the stairs at number 4, Privet Drive measured 11 steps from corner to corner if you walked it in a narrow, shuffling circuit, heel to toe, the way a small boy learns to measure the world when the world is mostly walls. Harry knew this. He had counted 11 steps so many times that the number had shed its meaning and become instead a kind of breathing, a rhythm his body kept even when he slept, even in the dark that was the specific dark of a place where no light had ever been invited. Not the dark of nighttime, which was general and impersonal and happened to everyone. The particular dark of enclosure, of a space that had been decided for him, a darkness that had his exact dimensions. He was 5 years old. He did not know this was unusual. He did not have the vocabulary for unusualness yet, or for what the tightness in his chest meant when he heard the television laugh from the other room, or for why his hands were shaped exactly like the woman in the one photograph he had seen once, pinned to the inside of an envelope on his aunt's writing desk before the envelope was taken away and the writing desk was locked. He did not know he had a mother. He had the shape of her hands, and he had no name for what that was. He knew hunger the way other children knew weather, as a condition that arrived and departed without asking permission, that had its own timetable, that was not personal and not punishment, though he had also been told it was punishment, and the contradiction between these two truths was one he had stopped trying to resolve. He knew the sound of footsteps. He knew which floorboard announced Aunt Petunia and which announced Uncle Vernon and which announced his cousin, who was heaviest and therefore loudest, whose approach had a particular rhythm of careless confidence, the sound of a person who has never needed to know what their footsteps sound like to anyone else. Harry knew these rhythms the way small, listening things know rhythms, mice behind skirting boards, spiders in ceiling corners, everything that has learned that attention is rarely kind, and that the advance notice of 2 seconds can be the difference between ready and caught. The cupboard smelled of cleaning fluid and old dust, and something underneath both of those, something mineral and foreign that Harry had always assumed was simply the smell of himself, the smell of being small and without value in a small and valueless space. He breathed it every night. It had become the smell of sleep. He was lying on the camp bed with his knees drawn to his chest and his eyes open in the dark, not because he was afraid but because sleep had not arrived yet and the dark was simply what there was. The television was saying something about football scores. Uncle Vernon's glass clinked against the table. The kitchen smelled, faintly, of the good dinner that had been made for 3 people and scraped clean from a pot he had washed twice. He was waiting. Not for anything specific. His body had learned to simply wait, the way water waits inside stone, not in anticipation of an outcome, but in the absolute, directionless patience of a thing that has no present capacity for movement, and so conserves itself completely. It was then that the earth moved, not as earthquake moves. There was no shuddering of joists, no cascade of dust from the ceiling, no rattle of the window in the hallway or the bottles on the kitchen shelf. This was something more deliberate than that. The earth moved the way a person shifts their attention in a quiet room, the way one's gaze lifts from a book and turns toward a sound that has not yet been made, the way a body orients itself toward something it has registered before the mind has caught up. The ground beneath the floorboards, beneath the slab foundations, beneath the neat square of English lawn with its neat English borders, that ground turned. And what it turned was not rock but something more fundamental than rock, the consciousness of deep material, the awareness that is older than thought and slower than any clock that has ever been built. The wall of the cupboard did not open. The wall of the cupboard was, briefly and completely, no longer entirely there. She was standing in the space where it had been. Harry looked at her. She was tall in the way that mountains are tall, not because she was physically enormous, though she was larger than any person he had seen, but because she occupied her space with a completeness that made the space seem insufficient. Her hair was dark and threaded with gray in the way that old stone is threaded with quartz, the pale lines of it catching the thin light that entered now from somewhere, a light that had not been in the cupboard before and that Harry did not look for, because looking away from her seemed inadvisable. Her hands were large. The knuckles were significant. The skin over them had the quality of very old worked leather, the quality of something that has spent an enormous length of time in contact with the world's surfaces. Her face was not old in the way that old people were old, not the accumulated, papery oldness of the woman at the corner shop, not the sagging, wine-colored oldness of certain relatives seen at Christmas. Her face was old the way cliff faces are old, worn smooth by the long, impersonal work of weather and time into something that was not youth and not age but something between and beyond both, endurance perhaps. The specific beauty of a thing that has simply continued. Her eyes were the color of amber, not brown, not hazel. Amber, that particular warm, ancient gold that carries inside it the preserved impression of a world that existed before any of this was here, before the road outside, before the house, before the careful English idea of a garden. Eyes that had that color as their natural color, without any human analog, and they were looking at him with an attention that was full and specific and had no element of performance in it. He read her. He had become very good at reading people. The cupboard had been his education in this, not books and chalk and desks, but the grammar of tension in a jaw, the syntax of a hand raised or not raised, the difference between the walk of someone carrying ordinary bad temper and the walk of someone carrying something directed. He read her now the way his fingers read the circuit of his walls, surface to depth, sign to meaning. What he found was vast, warm, furious. The fury was not directed at him. He understood the difference immediately and with the certainty of extensive practice. The difference between you are the problem and the fury that pre-existed your arrival and will outlast your departure, the fury of encountering a principle violated, a wrongness pressed into the world with such force that it cannot be ignored. She crouched down until she was level with him, and the motion of it was slow and immense, deliberate as a geological formation choosing a direction. She did not speak. She looked at his arms where the too large shirt had ridden up, and the thin light, it was stronger now, that sourceless light, warming the air fractionally above the ambient temperature of the cupboard, showed what was there to be read, and she read it. She went very still. Harry knew several kinds of stillness. The stillness before something bad happened had a coiled, compressed quality, air under pressure. The stillness of exhaustion was flat and gray and directionless. His own stillness was the stillness of things that have learned the value of taking up as little space as possible. This was none of those. This was the stillness of something vast deciding not to move yet, the stillness of a dam holding against a weight it could hold indefinitely, but chose, in this moment and for a specific reason, to keep contained. The fury gathered and gathered behind that stillness and did not overflow, because she would not allow it to overflow in front of him. Nobody had ever restrained anything on his behalf before. She reached out one large hand, slowly enough that he could see exactly what she intended and could, if he chose, turn away from it. He did not turn away. Her palm came to rest against his forehead, and it was warm, not body warm, not the warmth of skin over blood, but geothermal warm, the warmth of deep-buried stone reaching up through a long column of earth, the warmth of the world's interior pressing gently outward, and where her palm met his forehead, something that had been sealed shifted open. He had not known it was sealed, had not known there was a thing to open. It moved the way something frozen moves when the season changes and the ice finds it has been water all along, not a rupture, not a shock, but an inevitability that had been waiting for the correct temperature. And through that opening came not vision, not voice, not a flood of images or names or history. What came through was recognition, the sense of hearing spoken aloud, a word one has always known but never had occasion to encounter in the world, a word that is familiar from before language, familiar from before memory, a word that one's body has been keeping in a chamber whose door was simply never found before this moment. His name, not Harry, not boy, not the other thing he was called when they were angry, the name before those names. The name that had been pressed into the structure of him before anyone in this house, or this street, or this entire small country of categorized and cataloged people had thought to name him anything at all. A name that was old and large and tasted, for a reason he could not explain, of limestone after rain. That mineral, clean, specific taste. The taste of something essential being released from a very long compression. She said, in a voice that was exactly what Harry would have imagined a mountain's voice to be if mountains had voices, deep and layered, with harmonics that seemed to originate below the floor, below the foundation slab, below the carefully positioned gas pipes and the earthworm corridors of the garden. She said, "There you are." 2 words. She said them the way you say a thing you have been waiting to say for a very long time, not with drama, not with relief that spills over into sound, but with the absolute quiet weight of a person setting down something heavy and finally allowing their hands to open. Harry did not speak. He was 5 years old, and every word he had been taught had been calibrated for a world that was, he could sense now with a certainty he did not yet have framework for, a very small and inaccurate version of the actual world. None of his available words were the right size for this moment. So he said nothing, and his body, making its own assessment independent of vocabulary, leaned forward into her hand. She wrapped him in her cloak. It was wool, ancient and dark and substantial, with the weight of real quality, nothing like the synthetic fleece of his cousin's blankets or the thin nylon of his own sleeping bag. It smelled of clean stone and something herbal, something foreign that he had never smelled before, but that his body received as known, as familiar from a time before familiarity, had the kind of reference that could be consciously recalled. His hands found 2 fistfuls of it and held. He did not decide to hold. His hands decided. She lifted him as if the weight of him were not a matter of physical consideration, but a matter of simple attention. As if she had spent a very long time carrying things far heavier than this, and his weight was, compared to that weight, a kindness. She stood and she stepped through the space where the wall was not. The television was still reporting football. Uncle Vernon's glass was on the arm of his chair, his hand curled around it. Dudley was on the floor with his toy cars arranged in a hierarchy that only Dudley understood. Aunt Petunia was moving in the kitchen, the sounds of washing up, the particular precise efficiency of a woman who has decided how every room in her house should function and enforces that decision continuously. None of them looked up. Not one floorboard registered her passage. The instruments on Dumbledore's shelf in his office at Hogwarts, the delicate, silver handmade instruments that monitored certain conditions at number 4 Privet Drive, that chimed and twitched and exhaled small plumes of scented smoke when those conditions changed, stood absolutely still, needles unmoved, smoke undisturbed. Because the instruments were designed to measure magic, and the things they measured were magical disturbances, and Rhea did not move through magic. She moved through the earth, which she had made. She stepped out into the August night of Privet Drive, and the lamplight bent slightly toward her. All light tends toward very old, very warm things, a tendency so gentle that it goes universally unnoticed, and she walked, and her footsteps made no sound on the pavement, and Harry felt the motion of her as something his body understood before his mind could describe it. The sense of being moved by something so large that motion and stillness become the same experience, the way being carried by a tide feels, from inside the tide, like perfect rest. He was asleep before the end of the street. His hands did not let go. The place she took him to did not have an address and did not require one. Address is a system for navigating surfaces, and Othrys was not a surface. It was a depth, an old depth, one of the oldest, a mountain range that had existed in its current position since before the world had finished deciding what a mountain range should be. The Titans had built their throne here. The war with the Olympians had opened fissures in the rock that ran for kilometers and had never entirely closed, that geologists noted as unusual stratification patterns and wrote papers about which were correct in every physical particular and entirely wrong about everything that actually mattered. The mountain received those papers with equanimity. It had outlasted more significant misunderstandings. Harry woke in a room made entirely of stone. The stone was warm. This was the first thing, not the unfamiliarity of the ceiling height, not the quality of the light, not the fact that the bed beneath him was not a camp bed and was not narrow and was covered in dark wool of real weight. The first thing was the warmth of the stone itself, the geothermal warmth pressing outward through the walls and floor, and the recognition his body made. The same warmth as her hand, extended to encompass the entire room, the entire mountain, the entire arrangement of the world in which he now found himself. The light came from a depression in the floor where something burned without any fuel visible beneath it. A low, amber, completely steady flame that cast no shadows because it came from below rather than above, illuminating everything from the ground up, the way light looks in certain hours of late afternoon in very clear air. She was sitting in the corner of the room in a chair carved directly from the wall, as if the stone had considered the question of where to put a seat and answered it, and she was watching him with the full, patient, unperformative attention that was simply how she looked at things. He sat up. "Where is this?" he said, not a question. He had learned early that questions drew attention, and attention was most often a tax you paid in advance without knowing the rate. "Home," she said. He held this word in the space between them and examined it. "My home. Yours now," she said, "if you choose it." He had never been offered a choice before. Not in any real sense. The Dursleys' version of choice had always been a version of this or that unpleasant thing, or you do this or the other thing happens. A choice the way a lock is a choice between locked and not yet locked. This was different. The word sat in her mouth with its full weight intact, with all its implications acknowledged rather than concealed. She understood that offering a choice to someone who has not had one was not a small act. She was not pretending it was small. He looked at the walls, at the steady amber light, at her hands, resting on the stone arms of the stone chair with the stillness of things that genuinely do not need to demonstrate their patience, because their patience is geological and therefore simply factual. "Yes," he said. She nodded once. The air in the room was fractionally warmer. "Then we begin," she said. He learned to read from stone tablets older than the Latin alphabet, unfolded from shelves in a chamber deeper in the mountain that smelled of compressed time and dry mineral air. The languages came to him with an ease that would have alarmed anyone with formal training in linguistics, not because he was a prodigy in the way the word is usually meant, but because the blood claim Rhea had named in him carried the memory of a time when these languages were the daily speech of beings who were not human in any current sense of the term. And memory, when it lives in blood rather than in mind, does not require study. It requires only the correct conditions. He learned to count by the movements of stars, not the names the Greeks gave them, not the names the Romans gave those names, but the elder names, the ones given before mythology organized the sky into stories and thereby made it smaller. He learned the names and natures of every Titan who had existed, and what had been done to them, and how and by whom. Rhea taught him these things in the way she taught him everything, slowly, with silences between sentences that had the weight of strata, with her voice giving the information without the emotional inflection that would tell him how to feel about it first. She presented history as Othrys presented it, as geological fact, as thing that happened rather than thing that was done to us or thing that we survived. The emotional content was there. It was simply beneath the surface, where it had always been, where she had always kept it because the surface was too small to hold it without overflow. He was 7 the first time he understood what Kronos had done. He sat with this for 3 days in the way he had always sat with large things, moving through the mountain's chambers without much speech, running his hands along the walls, eating when the flat stone shelf outside his door had food on it, which it always did, sleeping when he needed to, waking to the amber light that never changed its quality regardless of what time it was. He was processing. His body knew how to process difficult information by moving through warm stone, and the mountain accommodated this without comment. On the 4th day, he found Rhea in the stone garden on the south face. Not a flower garden, though there were herbs, medicinal and ancient, growing in cracks and along the lower terraces. The garden was made of shaped stone figures cut into the mountainside over centuries, presences Rhea had carved in the times when carving was the available form of attention. He stood beside her in the morning light and looked at the carved figures and said, "He ate them." "Yes," she said, "your children, yes." Because he was afraid they would take his power. She was quiet. "That's what people do," Harry said, with a 7-year-old's directness. the directness of someone who has not yet learned to soften observations that make adults uncomfortable. When they're afraid of you, they try to make you smaller. She turned and looked at him, and what moved in her amber eyes did not reach her face but arrived in the air between them as a change in temperature, not heat, but presence, the sense of something very large leaning forward an increment. "Yes," she said quietly, "that is precisely what frightened people do." He nodded, he had thought so. He went back inside and walked his chambers and found that the mountain had shifted. Othrys was not fixed in the way that buildings are fixed. It was alive in the way that all geological things are alive, slowly and enormously, and his room was now 7 steps farther from the entrance than it had been when he left. He stood in the center of the new distance and looked at the walls. This is a place that moves, he thought, and something in his chest that had been a closed fist unclenched, not entirely, not suddenly, but the degree of a hand that has begun to believe it might, eventually, be allowed to open. He was 9 when his authority first surfaced. He had gone alone down the eastern ridge on a clear morning, when the Thessalian plain below was doing the particular golden thing it did in September, the wheat-colored flatness stretching to a horizon that felt optional, and he was sitting on a ledge where the limestone sheared away in a clean vertical drop, and the elevation made the whole visible world feel like an argument for being high up, and he was thinking about nothing in the focused, specific way that had taken him years to learn. The cessation of the counting, the cessation of the listening for footsteps, the arrival at a state that was simply presence in a place that held you. The snake came from his right along the warm rock, large, copper-scaled, not native to this altitude, which meant deliberate ascent, which meant intention. It stopped 3 feet from his hand, and regarded him with eyes that had the quality of old, clean water. Harry regarded it back. The snake opened its mouth and spoke, in a language that was not quite Parseltongue but was what Parseltongo had descended from, the way a river is descended from its source, carrying the source's nature without being the source, and it said, "You smell like the deep ground." "I live in the mountain," Harry said, in the same language without thinking about how he knew it. "The mountain chose you. The mother of the mountain chose me," Harry said. "I think the mountain agreed." The snake was still for a long moment, with the stillness of a thing reconsidering a prior assessment. Then it moved forward and rested its head briefly on his knee, not in submission, not in supplication, but in the manner of a very old thing acknowledging a very old thing, the greeting of 2 things that exist in the same register of the world, and then slid away over the edge of the rock and was gone. Harry sat for a long time in the aftermath. He had spoken in the first language and been understood. The snake had addressed him as a thing the mountain had recognized, which meant the mountain had a relationship with him that went beyond residence, beyond even the claimed kinship that Rhea had established. He turned this over carefully, examining it from different angles, in the methodical way she had taught him to examine new information. He went back inside and told Rhea. She listened to everything. She had the quality of a genuinely complete listener, not waiting for him to finish in order to respond, but actually receiving what was said, letting it arrive, holding it before answering. "Yes," she said when he finished. "The creatures of the old world will know you. You carry the first language in your blood." "What blood exactly?" he said. "My parents were British wizard people, weren't they?" "Your mother was," Rhea said. "And she died making herself into a shield for you, which is the oldest form of power. The willingness to unmake oneself entirely for the preservation of another. This is not love in the ordinary sense. It is the act that pre-existed love, the act that made love possible, and it resonates." She paused in her geological way. "When I touched your forehead in that place, I found the intersection of 2 very old things. The first, the bloodline of Othrys, dormant in your mother's ancestry, going back 5 generations to a daughter of mine named Petra who chose to walk among mortals. The second, your mother's sacrifice, which was precise enough and complete enough to reactivate what 7 generations of ordinary mortal life had rendered dormant." She looked at him. "You are not wizard-born in the British registry sense. You are Titan-born, recalled by sacrifice, and the claim is clean." Harry thought about this for a while. "Petra," he said. "She believed love was sufficient protection against the world she was leaving behind when she crossed into the mortal line. A pause. She was wrong about that, but her blood persisted. Blood does, Rhea said, even when everything else is taken. He was quiet for a moment more. So when you came to get me, he said, the cupboard you were. I was claiming what had never been properly left unclaimed, she said. And I was, she stopped. The pause was different from her other pauses. It had a quality not of deliberation, but of something held very carefully, something being kept from breaking against the edge of words that were too small for it. Also, she said again, and did not finish. She did not finish, and he did not press her to finish, because he was 9 and he had extensive experience with the grammar of things that do not complete themselves, and he knew that some sentences carry more content in their incompleteness than they ever would in a conclusion. He went to sit beside her in the stone garden, on the flat ledge she used as a bench, and she did not speak and he did not speak, and the afternoon went amber, and then the high-altitude blue that was a different blue from any blue available at lower elevations, deeper, more committed to being blue, and the mountain breathed around them, and they sat in it together, and that was sufficient. He was 12 when Chiron arrived. Harry saw him from the ridge, coming up the eastern path at a careful trot, and he descended to the first terrace to meet him. The terrace where the path widened and the limestone flattened into something approaching level ground, which was the nearest the mountain got to a formal threshold. He stood at its edge and waited, and Chiron arrived and they regarded each other without preamble. Chiron was old in the way of things that have spent a very long time engaged in the education of remarkable individuals, which leaves a specific mark, not quite the mark of wisdom, and not quite the mark of weariness, but something between the two, a quality of patient discernment, of having been surprised enough times to have stopped being surprised, without having lost the capacity to note when something is genuinely worth noting. Harry Potter, Chiron said. Yes, Chiron held out the letter, from the school called Hogwarts in Scotland. They have been attempting delivery for a year. The owls do not land here. Harry took it without urgency. The envelope was addressed in green ink, Mr. H. Potter, Mount Othrys, Thessaly, Greece, and he held it and read this address with the specific attention he gave to anything that demonstrated someone knew where he was, which meant Dumbledore, which meant the assumption set he had about magical Britain's monitoring needed revision. He knows I'm here, Harry said. He is a careful man, Chiron said. What does he want? To educate you, to bring you into the category he had prepared for you. Chiron's expression arranged itself into something that was not quite amusement but lived in its neighborhood. He believes you are a wizard child who has been unfortunately absent from the protections he arranged. And what does he know about what I am? Very little, Chiron said. He knows his instruments at the Surrey house have been silent for 7 years. He knows his investigators found no trace of a disruption to his enchantments. He knows Olympus has recently become, a measured pause, attentive to a particular frequency. Harry turned the letter in his hands. Attentive how? The usual manner of Olympian attention, Chiron said. Messengers. Gifts that are not gifts. Inquiries framed as expressions of warm concern. Zeus does not yet know what he is attentive to. He knows something has entered the arrangement of things. He has not yet taken its measure. Thank you, Harry said, for bringing this yourself. Chiron made a slight bow, the chest dipping forward, the equine weight shifting back, the precise gesture of a person who has decided this particular individual has earned the form. I have had the privilege of teaching several extraordinary young people in my time, he said. It is a pleasure to see what the mountain makes of its own. He turned and went back down the path, and Harry watched him go, and then turned and climbed back to the deep chamber where Rhea would be waiting. She was standing with both palms flat against the far wall, and the earth breath moved up through the floor crack in its steady mineral gusts, and she already knew what he was carrying. He set the letter on the stone ledge without a word, and stood behind her and waited. She did not turn. You knew it would come, he said. I knew. You're going to tell me I should go, she turned. In the amber light of the deep chamber she looked as she always looked and simultaneously not. There was something in her posture that was not the stillness he knew, something that had the quality of emotion held back, of a preparation being contained, like a wave that has gathered everything it intends to carry and has not yet decided to break. I am going to tell you what you are, she said, and let the decision follow from that, which is how decisions ought to be made. She told him about Petra, about the blood law, about the nature of Titan authority and how it differed from Olympian authority in the way that the foundation of a building differs from the building. The foundation is not the building. It is not visible. It does not have the building's particular arrangement of rooms, but without it the building is not a building but a collapse in progress. She told him that by the old laws, the laws written into the stone of reality before Olympus existed as a concept, before the Titanomachy, before the division of sky and sea and underworld. He was the heir of Othrys, and that the heir of Othrys held an authority above the Olympian order, not within it, the authority of the prior claim, the constitutional authority of the founder's line over whatever came after. She told him Zeus would know this the moment Harry made himself known. Harry listened to everything, the way she had taught him to listen, completely, without rushing toward response, letting the shape of it arrive fully before moving. "You want me to go," he said when she had finished. "I want you to go," she said, and the layers in her voice were audible, stratum below stratum, each carrying its own content. "Because hiding is something I have practice in. I hid 5 children in the earth and the sea and the dark, and I was careful and I was clever and I kept them safe. And when they were grown, they went to war and they won it, and they divided the world and I was proud." The next pause was long. "And then they built their thrones and forgot who carried them through. And what the hiding had done, the careful, loving, long hiding, was make them believe that safety was the same thing as sovereignty. It was not. It never is." She looked at him across the amber-lit chamber. "I will not make that error with you." Harry picked up the letter. He held it without opening it, feeling the mass of the parchment, the faint heat of its directional enchantment. "I'll go at 16, he said, "not as a first-year student, not to be sorted and catalogued and enrolled like an unclaimed thing being assigned a shelf." He turned the letter over. "I'll go as what I am. I'll go to establish a presence." Rhea was very still. "And if the British magical world refuses to accommodate that, then I will educate them about what they are dealing with. And if Olympus moves against you, then I'll invoke the old blood law," he said, "and let them count the cost of that." She looked at him for a long time. Across the deep chamber with the amber light and the earth breath moving between them and the walls that had been warm for his entire life, and were warm now, warm from the inside. The same warmth that had entered him through her hand when he was 5 years old in a dark cupboard with no vocabulary for what he was. She crossed the chamber. She pressed her palm flat against his chest, not his forehead, not the tentative first claiming that had been both question and answer, but a flat, deliberate placement, the press of a hand over a heartbeat, and beneath her palm something answered. It was warm and it was deep, and it resonated at the frequency of old stone, of basalt and limestone, and the world before the sea divided from the land, of the first fire that had nothing to do with wood or oxygen or the limited chemistry of surfaces. It was his, it had always been his, it had been in him since before his mother held him, since before she had thought to write his name down in any registry, and Rhea was not giving it to him. She was showing him that it had been safe. She was showing him that she had been the keeper of it while he grew into the size of what it required, and that the keeping was over, that he had grown. He put his hand over hers. "When did you know," he said, "that I was ready?" She thought in her slow, thorough way. "When you sat with the snake," she said, "and told it the mountain had chosen you. You said it the way you state the temperature of air, without pride, without fear. You said it the way things that are simply true are said and nothing else." She paused. "That is what readiness is, not the absence of uncertainty, the absence of the need for someone else to confirm what is already certain." He nodded once. She moved her hand. He stood in the deep chamber with his palm against his own sternum and felt what was in him, the depth and weight of it, the resonance that ran down through the floor and into the roots of Othrys, and through those roots into every stone that had ever been stone, all the way down to the hot center of the world that Rhea had been in relationship with since before anything else existed. This is what they put in a cupboard, he thought, with a clarity that was not fury, that was something colder and cleaner than fury. This is what they tried to make small, he thought. I'm curious to see them try that again. 4 years passed the way Othrys' years passed, without rushing, without skipping anything, with the complete thoroughness of processes that are not working against a deadline. He learned the deep history, the Titanomachy in its full scope, which bore very little resemblance to the Olympian accounts, which were Victor's history and therefore accurate about the outcome and misleading about almost everything that had produced the outcome. He learned the nature of divine authority and its distinction from divine power, which was a distinction most gods never troubled themselves to draw, power being the capacity to act, authority being the legitimacy that determines whether an action will hold. He had seen, in Rhea's teaching, what happened when power was exercised without authority. It produced outcomes that required continuous maintenance, continuous suppression, continuous anxiety about the next Titan heir old enough to read the blood law carefully. He learned in his 14th year to extinguish divine ichor. The first time was unplanned. Rhea had made a small flame in her palm, the ordinary divine gesture, the casual expression of fire from a being for whom fire is an expression of will rather than a chemical process. And Harry had been watching it, and something in him had simply reached, the way you reach for something when your hands know the motion before your mind has named the intention. The flame went out, not blown out, not smothered, simply out as if it had never been, not the dying down of fire deprived of fuel, but the cessation of fire deprived of the divine current that had been sustaining it. Rhea looked at her hand, then at him. "Good," she said. It was the most unqualified statement she had made about anything he had done in the 7 years he had been on the mountain, and what it produced in him he would not name and did not need to name. It was in his hands, in the way they relaxed at his sides, in the way he looked at the ceiling for a moment before looking back at her, in the slight alteration of his breathing. He looked at his own hand, he thought, so that is what that is for. He learned in his 15th year to move through the earth the way she moved, not the instantaneous translocation of wizarding apparition, but something that had more in common with tide than travel, the sense of being continuous with the stone, of having no absolute edge where the rock began, of being able to be somewhere because the ground between here and there was not an obstacle but a medium. The way a fish is not separated from the water, but moves through it as an expression of what both the fish and the water are. He stood at Othrys' edge and looked at the plain below and thought about return, not the return of the prodigal, diminished, hungry, asking to be received. Not the return of the exile, shaped by bitterness, sharpened by resentment into something that cuts indiscriminately. He thought about the return of water after drought, changed by the journey, carrying new things, certain in its own nature, moving according to its own logic, indifferent to whether the landscape had prepared for its arrival or not. Water does not ask, it arrives. He turned 16 in the stone garden in Rhea's company, in the September light that came down the southern face at the angle of late season, warm and going gold. In the morning he went to the deep chamber and said, "It's time." She was already there. "Yes," she said. He stood at the threshold of the chamber and looked at her, at the amber eyes and the quartz-threaded hair, and the hands that had carried him from a cupboard in Surrey, through an English night and up a mountain, and through 11 years of the only education that would have been sufficient for what he needed to become. "Will you come?" he said. "When you need me," she said, "I will be there." He looked at her. "Not before," she said. "You do not need me before." He understood this. He understood it the way he understood everything she had taught him, not because she had explained it, but because the shape of it was correct, because it matched the deep structure of what he had been built to know. She was not sending him alone because she was indifferent. She was sending him alone because she had done her work, and the work was complete, and the completion required that he go out into the world under his own authority, not under the extension of hers. He crossed the chamber. He stood before her and she bent toward him, not a bow, not quite, but a lean, the way old trees lean in wind, the way things that have grown very tall and very rooted still allow themselves to be moved by what they love, and he pressed his forehead against hers, which was warm and rough and smelled of limestone after rain, the smell that had been the smell of sleep and safety and home for 11 years. They stood like that for a time that neither of them measured. The earth breath moved between them. The amber light held, then he stepped back. He pulled his cloak on, his own cloak now, dark wool cut to his size from the same fabric as hers, heavy and warm and smelling of the mountain. And he turned, and he walked up through the chambers of Othrys toward the surface, up through the warm stone corridors toward the light that came filtering down from the entrance, the white-gray light of a September morning that was not amber or geothermal but was simply sky, simply the world that was not the mountain, simply the enormous, complicated, insufficient place he was going back into because it was time and he was ready, and because Rhea had not built him for the cupboard or for the mountain but for the world, which was where the work was. Behind him, the deep fire burned in its depression in the floor, amber and steady and unfading, and she stood in its light with her hands at her sides and watched him go. And she did not flinch, because she had not flinched when she watched Poseidon go and Demeter go and Hades go and Hera go and Zeus go, and she was not going to flinch now. And the knowledge of what it would cost him and what it would cost her, and what it would cost the world that had not yet understood what was coming was entirely present in her and entirely contained, the way all very large things are contained in old stone, held, not hidden, present, not performed. The mountain breathed. She breathed with it. She was still watching when the sound of his footsteps reached the surface and stopped, which was the sound of the world receiving him, which was, if you knew how to listen, which she did, the sound of a beginning. Chapter 2. The king returns to the low country. London received him the way cities receive things that do not fit their categories, with the brief, skittering disorientation of a crowd that registers something peripheral, something that occupies the wrong slot in the available taxonomy, and then moves on because moving on is the city's primary survival mechanism, and has been since the Romans decided this particular bend in the river was worth arguing over. He stepped out of the ground at the corner of Charing Cross Road and Flitcroft Street, not from any station, not from any visible aperture, but from the narrow passage between a second-hand bookshop and a courier depot, where the pavement was old enough and the foot traffic sparse enough that the earth had some latitude for this kind of transaction. He stood on the pavement, and the city's particular sensory register arrived all at once: exhaust and fried food and the iron smell of the underground 3 levels down, the percussion of buses, a telephone ringing in a first-floor office, the smell of rain that had fallen 2 hours ago and was still present in the stone. He was still. He let it settle, this new density, this plurality of intention moving in every direction simultaneously. He was tall now and lean in the way of people who have spent years covering difficult terrain, and his face was his father's face with his mother's eyes set in it. Green, the specific and startling green that people occasionally clocked and then looked away from, uncertain what they had seen. His cloak was dark and ordinary enough at a glance that no one looked twice. His posture was the contained, unhurried stillness of a person who knows precisely where they are going and feels no urgency about arriving. He turned and walked toward a pub called the Leaky Cauldron, which he had read about in 4 separate texts, and which smelled, even from the street, of something that had been fermenting since before the building's current facade. The landlord did not look up. The pub held its mid-morning population, 3 witches in close conversation over something that smelled aggressively of fennel and ambition, a wizard reading the Daily Prophet with the focused expression of someone being comprehensively wrong about current events, a figure in the far corner whose dimensions exceeded the structural tolerances of the furniture supporting them. The fire going in August, that particular habit. He went through to the courtyard, tapped the correct sequence on the brick wall. He had read the sequence in a text Rhea had acquired, a slim volume of practical magical Britain that Chiron had left on the first terrace 3 years ago without comment, and watched the wall open. Diagon Alley. He walked its length once, end to end, without entering anything. He was reading it the way he read new terrain, surface first, then depth, then the structural logic that produced both. He noted the architecture of the institutions. He noted which establishments were older than their facades and which were newer than they appeared. He noted where the crowd moved with ease and where it organized itself unconsciously around something, a social pressure point, a place of significant authority. Gringotts sat at the top of the alley in white marble that was not pretending to be anything other than what it was, which Harry respected. He went there last, after the full circuit. He was 3 steps inside the main doors when the nearest teller looked up. It was not the look tellers gave prospective customers. It was the look of an instrument whose needle has just moved past the end of its calibrated range, not broken, but reading something it was not designed to measure and registering the fact. The teller was senior, identified by the number of rings on his fingers and the quality of his jacket, and he went very still in the specific way that goblins go still when they are concentrating completely. Harry stopped. The stillness spread. It moved through the hall in sequence, teller to teller, the way silence spreads through a room of attentive things when something changes the register of the room. Quills stopped moving. Counting stopped. A low tone that existed below the range of hearing, but not below the range of sensation, moved through the marble floor, and Harry felt it come up through the soles of his boots. A question, asked in the language of very old institutions that have ongoing dealings with things older than themselves. He let it find its answer. Through his feet and down through the floor and into the roots of Gringotts' foundations, which were old, older than the current building, older than the current city, the roots going down to where London's particular geology began. There went back a resonance, and the resonance was in the frequency of Othrys, which was a frequency Gringotts' instruments had not measured in 3,000 years but had not forgotten the shape of. Because goblin institutional memory is one of the most reliable instruments in the known world. Every goblin in the main hall stopped working. The senior teller descended from his high seat with a deliberateness that was not ceremony, but was operating by the same principles as ceremony, the principles of significant occasion, of things that happen rarely enough that each instance must be treated with complete precision. He stood before Harry and looked up with the unblinking focus of something that has decided to be entirely honest, because the mathematics of the situation require it. "Your name," he said. "Harry Potter." A pause. "Your full name and claim." Harry considered for a moment in the brief way of someone checking a door before opening it rather than deciding whether to open it. "Harry James Potter," he said. "Last heir of the House of Othrys, blood claim established 11 years prior on the mountain of the Titan Mother, lineage descending through the line of Petra of Othrys, 5th generation." The goblin's face did not widen. Goblins do not widen their faces. But something moved in the architecture of his expression that was the goblin equivalent of a significant recalibration, a shift in the internal register, a reclassification of the situation from one category to another, much higher stakes category. "Verification will be required," he said. "I know." The room they took him to was below the main hall, down a passage that smelled of copper and very old paper, its walls lined with instruments of silver and iron whose purposes Harry could identify by their shapes and whose needles were already moving before he entered the room. The shallow dish was brought, silver and wide, and Harry pressed his thumb to it, and what bloomed in the silver was not the ordinary red of wizarding blood. It was amber-tinged and deep, a color that had no current name, the color of something that had been preserved inside the earth for longer than the current geological era. The 4 goblins in attendance looked at it. One of them made a sound that was not quite a word. They looked at it for the length of time it took to be entirely certain of what they were seeing. "The accounts," the senior teller said, with the careful precision of a person who has decided each word must be load-bearing, "which have been sealed pending identification of the Othrys heir, will be available to you immediately." He paused. "You will also want to be informed that there have been inquiries, 2 in the last 6 months. From whom?" The first from a London solicitor, acting on behalf of an educational trust administered by Albus Dumbledore, seeking documentation related to a missing minor named Harry Potter. He paused with the precision of a man delivering 2 pieces of information of unequal weight and being careful about the order. The second from a Greek maritime company that is not a maritime company, 3 weeks ago. They asked only whether a vault existed in this name. Harry was still. "We told them," the goblin said, "no comment." "You deviated from standard protocol," Harry said. "We had reasons," the goblin said, which was a sentence that contained an entire institutional history in 4 words, and Harry did not press it. He stood in the copper-scented room and understood the precise shape of his situation. Olympus had not waited for his arrival. Olympus had begun moving before his arrival, which meant the timetable he had constructed, arrive, establish, demonstrate force recognition, had just been compressed by an unknown degree. They were not waiting to assess what he was. They were already trying to determine whether he existed and how much of a problem that existence constituted. "Hermes," he said. The goblin did not confirm this. He looked at the middle distance in the specific way of someone who has made a considered decision not to confirm something. "Thank you," Harry said, "for the protocol deviation." The teller inclined his head by a fraction. In goblin terms, this was equivalent to a formal bow, and it was done without any of the performance that formal bows usually contain. It was done as a statement of fact. "My lord," the teller said, deploying the title with the careful weight of someone who has not used it in a very long time and is choosing not to qualify or apologize for it. Harry went back out into Diagon Alley and stood in the August heat with the alley's layered smells around him, potions, ingredients, and old paper, and the faint electrical hum of magical density. And he thought about timelines and about gods who send inquiries to banks. She found him. He had not sought her out, and she had not been specifically looking for him, or she had been cataloging anomalies, and he was the most anomalous thing the alley had produced in recent memory. And the result was the same regardless of which causal pathway had produced it. She arrived at his left shoulder with a folder of notes tucked under her arm, and her eyes already moving at the speed of someone who has been in the middle of a rapid-fire internal analysis since before she finished walking over. "You're not in any current registry," she said. "I checked the registry this morning because I'm cross-referencing enrollment demographics against family magical potency across 4 generations, which is for a paper I'm writing that." She stopped herself, with visible effort. The way someone cuts off a line of conversation they can see is running away from the relevant point. "You're not registered." You walked into Gringotts and the entire hall went silent in a way I've never seen documented anywhere. And I've read every available history of Gringotts' institutional behavior going back to the 14th century. She paused. "I've been standing outside for 20 minutes. She was his age. Brown hair pulled back with the approximate organization of someone who had started with a plan and then got interested in something else. Hogwarts prefect badge. The speech pattern of someone who had learned formal registers separately from informal ones, and sometimes moved between them faster than her mouth could manage. Muggle-born, he was nearly certain. There was a quality of the self-taught to her, the quality of someone who had built their knowledge base from first principles rather than inheriting its architecture. "What do you think you observed?" Harry said. She looked at him with directness, not the challenging directness of someone establishing dominance, but the directness of someone for whom eye contact is the default setting of honest conversation. "The goblins responded to you as if you hold a constitutional claim," she said. "A sovereign claim. Not a customer claim, not even a major account holder claim. I know this sounds. It doesn't sound anything," Harry said. "It's accurate." A pause. She processed this with visible rapidity, the kind of processing that happens too fast to be entirely internal and leaks out into the face. "Right," she said. "Right then." She looked at him. "Hermione Granger. Harry Potter." The pause that followed had the specific quality of recalibration, the rearranging of an existing information structure to accommodate new data, the moment when a name ceases to be a category and becomes a specific individual. "Harry Potter," she said. "Yes, the Harry, the one who, the same. But you haven't been at Hogwarts. There have been 7 years of ministry-level concern about a missing." "I wasn't missing," Harry said. "I was in a specific location receiving a specific education." "Where?" "A mountain in northern Greece." She looked at him. "By whom?" "By someone considerably more qualified than anyone on the Hogwarts faculty," he said. "In subjects the Hogwarts curriculum has never covered and currently could not." She was quiet for a moment. Her eyes moved in the rapid, systematic way of someone cross-referencing multiple internal sources simultaneously, running the available data against the available frameworks, finding that the available frameworks were insufficient, and already beginning to construct new ones. "You're here now," she said. "In the alley, which means you've chosen to be here, which means you want something from the British magical world." "I want to establish a presence in it," Harry said, "and I need to do that from Hogwarts." "Dumbledore won't find that straightforward," she said. "No. He has very considerable influence. Over the ministry, over the school governors, over the narrative structure of, well, of nearly everything that gets called official in magical Britain. He'll want to control the circumstances of your arrival. He'll try, Harry said. You don't seem concerned about that. I'm not. She looked at him for another moment. Something in her expression shifted, not the recalibration, something different, something more like a person making a decision that is slightly ahead of the reasoning they'll use to justify it afterward. Are you going to Hogwarts now? Yes. I'll come, she said, which appeared to surprise her marginally more than it surprised him. They walked toward the flue together, and she was already talking about the historical survey of pre-founder sacred sites in Scotland that she had found in the restricted section, and that she was fairly certain Dumbledore didn't know she had found. And Harry listened to her and watched the alley and thought about the mountain inquiry from 3 weeks ago. And above the alley, the August sky was very blue and entirely neutral, the way skies are before they have decided what to do. Hogwarts knew him before he reached the gates. He felt it as he crossed the grounds from the Hogsmeade Road, a spreading recognition that moved outward from his footsteps and then reversed, going down through the topsoil and into the bedrock, the way a tree sends roots into deep water. The hill had been a sacred site before the founders arrived. The deep foundation stones had been placed by hands that understood the hill was already something, that this particular elevation of Scottish granite wanted to be a place of specific intention, and those stones still carried that prior sacredness in them, compressed and patient, and they spoke when he walked over them in the language of things that have been waiting a long time for the correct resonance. He stopped on the path. The castle above was warm gray stone against an early afternoon sky that was doing the specific Scottish thing of implying weather from several directions simultaneously. The towers. The lake beyond the grounds, still and dark. The grounds themselves, that particular shade of northern green that happens when soil is deep and well-watered, and the light comes at an angle that makes everything seem slightly more real than it needs to. The hill said in no language but its own, finally. Are you all right? Hermione said, 3 steps ahead, turning back. The hill knows me, he said. She looked at the hill, then at him, then back at the hill, with the expression of someone adding a new category to a taxonomy that has been expanding rapidly since breakfast and shows no sign of slowing. Because Hogwarts is built on a pre-founder site, she said. The historical survey I mentioned, it puts the original sacred designation at roughly 3,000 years BCE, which the official founder's narrative completely elides because it complicates the yes. She paused. That would explain the recognition. Partly, Harry said. She looked at him, decided not to press the other part yet, opened her notebook. They walked on. The great doors of the entrance hall swung open before he touched them, not slowly, not dramatically, but with the simple certainty of something that has been waiting to perform this function and is ready. Hermione noted this. She wrote it down. Harry walked through without looking at the doors, because the doors were not what he had come to speak to. The gargoyle guarding the headmaster's staircase moved aside before he could speak. The staircase turned without his stepping onto it. He wrote it up in the silence of the castle's deliberate welcome, and Hermione followed 2 steps behind, writing steadily, and above them Dumbledore's door was already open. Dumbledore was at his window, not behind his desk, not the position of a man conducting an interview, managing the geometry of authority. At the window with his hands clasped behind his back, looking out at the grounds, and Harry understood immediately that he had known they were coming across those grounds, and had been watching and had chosen the window deliberately. The position of a man who does not want to hide that he has been thinking about this moment, and has decided that transparency, at least about that much, was the correct opening. He was old in the way of things that have accumulated a great deal of specific history, archival old, layered with the particular residue of a life spent in close proximity to enormous events. Long white beard, half-moon spectacles. Blue eyes that were, behind the spectacles, doing the rapid, thorough work of someone who has met many unusual people, and knows exactly how much information is available if you look without the interference of what you expected to see. He turned from the window. Harry, he said, the name chosen carefully, not Mr. Potter, not the formal address that would have been the safer choice. The name of the child he had been looking for, offered without performance. Professor Dumbledore, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. The looking was complete and unhurried, the kind that does not perform itself. He looked at the cloak, at the posture, at the face that was James Potter's face in its structure and Lily Potter's face in its eyes, and he looked at what was underneath those, at the quality of the stillness, at the thing that the 11 years had built in the bones of the boy, and whatever he had prepared to say shifted as he looked. "Please," he said. "Sit." "I'll stand," Harry said, a brief pause in which Dumbledore recalibrated. "Of course." He moved from the window to his desk, but he did not sit, he stood behind it, which meant they were level, which was a choice Harry noted. "I have carried, for a very long time, a considerable weight of concern for your well-being. Your absence from the arrangement I put in place." "The cupboard," Harry said. Dumbledore stopped. The portraits on the walls were very still. The instruments on the shelves ticked quietly into an attentive silence. Fawkes, on his perch, looked at Harry with the ancient, unfrightened gaze of something that has been alive long enough to know that most things it thought were unprecedented were precedented, and something in the bird's expression suggested this situation might be one of the exceptions. "I want to be specific," Harry said, "because precision matters in this kind of conversation. The arrangement you made placed a 5-year-old child with people who did not want him, in a house where his designated sleeping area was a storage cupboard beneath the stairs. The basis for this arrangement was the calculation that certain protections outweighed certain costs." He paused. "I'm not raising this to cause pain. I am raising it because I want to understand whether you knew the specifics." The silence in the office was the kind that cost something to produce and more to sustain. Dumbledore's hands on the desk were very still. "I did not know the specifics," he said, and the sentence had no management in it, no defensive architecture, no careful lawyering of the boundary between knowledge and ignorance. "I knew the household was not a warm one. I believed the protections outweighed the cost, and I did not investigate whether that belief was accurate, and I was wrong." He stopped. "I was wrong," he said again, as if the first instance had been insufficient, as if the sentence needed to be said a second time to be fully present in the room. Harry looked at him. He had arrived prepared for the careful deployment of a formidable intelligence toward the management of a conversation. He had prepared, specifically, for Dumbledore's considerable gift for making the management of a situation feel like genuine concern, for the alchemy he performed with warmth and authority, the way he transmuted strategic positioning into apparent grandfatherliness. He had prepared detailed responses to several versions of that. He had not specifically prepared for this. "Good," Harry said. "Then we can be direct." "I would prefer that very much," Dumbledore said, and the relief in his voice was not politic. Harry told him what he was. Not the full history. Dumbledore was an intelligent man, and would receive a summary with the same accuracy he would receive an account 3 times the length. He told him the bloodline and the blood law. He told him the authority it carried and the nature of that authority, its relationship to the Olympian order, and the distinction between that relationship and any kind of hostility to the current arrangement of things. He told him what he wanted from Hogwarts, which was a base, a presence, an established position in the British magical world from which he could be known as what he was rather than what had been prepared for him. Dumbledore listened to all of it. He took his spectacles off partway through and held them in one hand and listened without them, which was the gesture of a man who has decided that seeing clearly in the ordinary sense is less important than receiving clearly in a deeper one. When Harry finished, Dumbledore was quiet for long enough that the instruments on the shelves seemed to hold their collective breath. "The night my instruments went silent," he said finally, "I concluded there had been an enchantment failure. I had someone verify the house physically. You were gone. The wards were entirely intact." He put his spectacles back on with the deliberateness of a man taking up a tool he needs for the next part of the task. "Because she does not move through magic." "No," Harry said. "She is older than the concept of wards," Dumbledore said, and it was not quite a question. It was a man confirming for himself the shape of an error by speaking it aloud. "Yes." Dumbledore sat down. He sat down carefully, in the manner of someone whose legs have been making a reasonable case for this for several minutes, and have finally won the argument. He looked at Harry across the desk. "You have been raised by Rhea," he said, with the quality of a man itemizing something that needs to be fully present in the room, on Othrys for 11 years. You are the blood heir of Othrys by 5-generation descent through your mother's line. You carry the old blood law and the authority it conveys. And you have come to Hogwarts, he paused. You have come to be known. Yes, Harry said, that is precisely it. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time, the kind of looking that is not assessment but something more like the experience of a man who has believed for a long time that he understood the dimensions of the room he was standing in, and has just encountered a wall where he thought there was open space, and is standing at it, pressing his hand to it, not with distress, but with the specific startled awe of someone who has just discovered the room is larger than they knew. The Olympians, Dumbledore said. Gringotts received an inquiry 3 weeks ago, Harry said. They wanted to know whether the vault existed. Dumbledore's expression shifted with the sharp precision of a man who has spent 70 years playing chess at a very high level and has just identified a threat he had not tracked. Then we have considerably less time than I imagined. Yes, you understand what Olympus will do, Dumbledore said. Not from malice, I want to be clear about that, because understanding the motivation accurately is. They'll move to neutralize me, Harry said, because the existence of a legitimate Titan heir with a clean blood claim is a constitutional crisis for the current order. It's not about me specifically. It's about precedent. He paused. Yes, I understand. Dumbledore looked at him for a moment with an expression that was not, Harry thought, entirely comfortable for the person wearing it, the expression of a man accustomed to being the most comprehensively prepared person in most rooms discovering that this was not most rooms. There is a suite on the 7th floor, Dumbledore said, and the decision was clean in his voice, the decision of a man who has weighed and chosen without belaboring the weighing. The castle has kept it, he paused. In my experience, Hogwarts keeps certain spaces available. The castle has kept that suite for a considerable number of years. I had not previously understood what it was keeping it for. Harry said nothing. The Hill had already told him what the suite was for. I will not pretend, Dumbledore said, to be able to offer you protection from what Olympus may choose to do. I would not insult you with the suggestion. He paused. I can offer you this, Hogwarts, and whatever the knowledge and networks of this institution can provide, and my own, somewhat diminished, in light of this conversation, certainty that I understand the shape of things. That I place at your disposal. Harry looked at him. That's sufficient, he said. Hermes came at nightfall, through the edge of the window frame as if architectural thresholds were suggestions rather than facts, and he was smaller than expected and faster than anything Harry had seen that was not Rhea, moving with the coiled efficiency of something that has been in motion for several thousand years and has optimized every aspect of the motion down to the last degree. The winged sandals were not decorative. Harry Potter, Hermes said, and his voice had the quality of a man who is professionally neutral and is currently having his professionalism tested by the fact that the person he's been sent to address is sitting in a chair by a window with a stone tablet on the table beside him, and an expression of complete patient attention that is somehow more unsettling than any number of threatening postures. Hermes, Harry said. A pause. Hermes recalibrated. The Olympian Council extends its warmest regards and expresses its keen interest in the well-being of Rhea's, of the individual known as Harry Potter, and wishes to propose a meeting between relevant parties in order to clarify the current. Tell me what Zeus actually said, Harry said. Hermes looked at him. Something in his face moved, not discomfort exactly, but the expression of a professional messenger who is encountering, for the first time in recent memory, someone who understands that the message and the subtext are two entirely separate objects. Zeus said, Hermes began, and the carefully constructed diplomatic phrasing was gone, replaced by something more direct and therefore more useful, that he would like to assess the situation personally. He used the word clarify, but the conversation that followed the drafting of this message involved several senior Olympians, 3 hours, and there may have been some lightning. He wants to know if I'm a threat before he decides what to do about me, Harry said. That would be an accurate reduction, yes. And he wants to do it in a context he controls. Harry turned the stone tablet over in his hands. It was one he'd brought from Othrys, a secondary text on the blood law provisions, dense and specific. Because if I'm a threat he can't manage in a context he controls, the calculation changes. Hermes was very still. "Go back to Zeus," Harry said, setting the tablet down with the deliberate care of someone putting away a tool they'll need again shortly. "Tell him I am not Rhea's ward. I am the heir of Othrys. Tell him I will speak to him when I choose in a location I choose on terms I determine, which is the prerogative the blood law assigns to the prior line." He paused. "Tell him I know he has people in the Olympian archive going through the blood law provisions right now. Tell him they'll find what I already know. There is no mechanism under the old law for the neutralization of a legitimate heir. There is no precedent he can point to and no constitutional provision that gives him authority over this claim." Hermes was quiet for a moment. "He won't like that," Hermes said. "No," Harry said. "But he'll think about it, which is what I need him to do." He looked at Hermes. "And tell him one other thing. Tell him I have read Rhea's account, the one on the eastern ridge of Othrys, the one she wrote after the war." Hermes' expression changed in a way that was small and specific and significant, the expression of someone who did not know that document still existed and is now assessing what its existence means. "He'll understand which account," Harry said. "Word for word," Hermes said, and he went back through the window edge, and the room held the smell of something warm and dry and winged for a moment after he was gone, and then that too dissipated, and outside the window the Scottish night was dark and enormous, and the loch was a darkness within the dark. 2 days later, the sky broke open, not in the manner of weather. The September clouds that had been assembling over the highlands since Harry's arrival had a different quality from this. This was intentional, the sky parting the way a curtain is pulled, a separation of the atmospheric layers that was not meteorological but architectural, something being opened from the other side. The smell came first, ozone, sharp and charged, the smell of electrical potential building toward release. Then the pressure, not atmospheric pressure, but the specific pressure of divine presence, the sense of a ceiling being lowered, of the space above the courtyard becoming suddenly occupied by something that had both physical weight and the additional weight of 3,000 years of accumulated worship and institutional authority. Lightning struck the courtyard flagstones. When the light cleared, Zeus was standing in the scorch mark. He was not as tall as myth made him. He was not as physically vast as the descriptions. He was using his moderate manifestation, his contemporary context form, the form calibrated to register as significant without registering as immediately catastrophic, and he wore it with the ease of long practice. What he was in this form was the most present person Harry had ever seen, present the way storms are present, every peripheral sense aware of him simultaneously, the air around him carrying the charge of ongoing decision, the sense of a power that was not currently being exercised, and therefore could, at any moment, be. He had chosen a gray suit. Harry noted this, the deliberate choice of contemporary dress as a signal, I am meeting you on your terms in your world, which was itself a negotiating position. It said, I am prepared to be reasonable. Harry came down the castle steps and across the courtyard and stopped 10 feet from the scorch mark. Hermione had followed. She was 3 steps behind him, notebook open, pen moving at speed. Zeus looked at Harry. Harry looked back. Harry Potter, Zeus said, with the warm, precise deployment of the more diminutive name, the name of a child, not a claimant, and the warmth was genuine in its production even if strategic in its application. The warmth of a man who has spent 3,000 years being the most powerful and best-liked person in any room, and has not yet fully registered that this might be a different kind of room. Zeus, Harry said. Something moved through Zeus's expression, brief, involuntary, the flicker of a man who is accustomed to being addressed by title and is recalibrating the nature of the exchange he is in. He recovered it immediately, and the smile that followed was considerable, wide and warm, and projecting the specific confident benevolence of someone who has never, in 3 millennia, had to wonder whether the room was with him. I appreciate you receiving me, Zeus said. I wanted to. You descended without invitation to a school that contains several hundred mortal children, Harry said. Let's not frame it as a courtesy visit. The smile adjusted. Not gone, reconfigured. Behind it, the charge in the air around his hands increased by a measurable degree. Refreshingly direct, Zeus said. My mother's influence, no doubt. He tilted his head in the specific way of a man deploying a reference to create intimacy, the reference to my mother designed to establish common ground, shared affection, the suggestion that they were, in some fundamental sense, family in the same story. She has always favored directness. She has always favored precision, Harry said. Those are different things. Directness can be performed, precision cannot. A pause. Zeus looked at him with the smile still present on his face, and the eyes behind it doing something that the smile was not. The eyes were working. The full, serious, comprehensive work of a very intelligent being taking the complete measure of something it had not previously fully measured. The old blood law, Zeus said, shifting register, the warmth dialing down to something more businesslike. A remarkable claim, very ancient. I have had my people looking into the current applicability of. There is no question of current applicability, Harry said. The blood law has no sunset provision. It has no supersession clause. It predates the Titanomachy, and it predates the division of domains, which means it predates every legal and constitutional framework you could point to as an authority for superseding it. Your people found this. He paused. That's why you came in person. Zeus was quiet. Because if my claim were legally challengeable, Harry said, you would have sent a legal challenge, not lightning. Behind Harry, Hermione's pen had gone quiet. She had stopped writing, which was a significant indicator. Zeus turned slightly, not fully away, not the dismissive turn of a man ending a conversation, but the partial turn of a man reorienting himself, taking a different angle on something he is still fully engaged with. What I know, Zeus said, and the warmth was gone from his voice entirely now, leaving something that was cleaner and more honest for its absence, is that a mortal, however remarkable his ancestry and however impeccable his education, is standing in a Scottish schoolyard claiming an authority that has not been exercised in 3,000 years. And the last time that authority was exercised, he paused, half the world was unmade. I know, Harry said, I read the full account. You read the Olympian, I read your mother's account, Harry said. Zeus stopped. The one she wrote on the eastern face of Othrys, Harry said. In the year after the war ended, after your council was established and your domains were divided and you each went back to your separate thrones. He paused, and let the pause hold for exactly as long as it needed to hold and no longer. You didn't speak to her for 300 years. Something happened in Zeus's face that was not any of his performed expressions. It was something underneath them, in the layer where the being who existed before the king still lived, in the place that was not divine authority and not political strategy, and not 3,000 years of institutional confidence, but something that predated all of those, something that was simply the residue of a very old and specific pain. His hands at his sides were very still. That account, he said quietly. She gave me access to everything, Harry said. She held nothing back. That is how she taught. That is why I know the blood law better than your archivists. I read it on the stone it was written into, not from a copy of a translation. Zeus looked at him for a long time, and what he was doing behind that look was not assessment in the adversarial sense. It was something more like hearing, the specific quality of listening that occurs when something you have spent a very long time not thinking about is suddenly present in the room. I am not here to overthrow you, Harry said. The sentence landed in the courtyard's charged air without qualification, without diplomatic padding, without the kind of careful surrounding language that would have let it be received as a negotiating position. It was simply said, the way things simply true are said. I am not here to claim your domains. I'm not interested in sitting on your council or adjudicating your disputes with your brothers or participating in the management of your pantheon. The authority of the Othrys heir is constitutional. It governs the relationship between the divine order and the mortal world, the stewardship of the blood law, the preservation of the old compacts. It is not a throne. It is not a seat of power in the sense you mean when you use that word. He paused. What I am here for is to exist as what I am, in the world I was born into, without being neutralized by a council that is afraid of a precedent. The charge in the air around Zeus's hands had stilled, not dissipated. Stilled, the difference between a storm that has ended and a storm that is pausing, and the distinction between those two things was material. The precedent, Zeus said. Yes, Harry said. Because if I can exist cleanly, legitimately, with the blood law acknowledged, Then the question of what other old claims might exist becomes, as you say, applicable. And you don't want that question asked. He looked at Zeus directly. I understand why. I'm not asking you to stop being afraid of it. I'm telling you that the fear does not constitute grounds. Hermione made a sound that was not quite a word. She wrote something very quickly. Zeus looked at Harry for a long time. The sky above the courtyard was doing nothing, not clearing, not worsening, simply holding as if it too was waiting. You would invoke the full blood law provisions, Zeus said. Not a question. A man confirming the shape of a threat by voicing it aloud, the way Dumbledore had confirmed the shape of his error earlier in the same day. If we move to neutralize you, every provision, Harry said, every pre-Olympian constitutional right in the full account, which your archivists have not found because the relevant tablets are not in any archive they have access to. They are in the mountain, he paused. I will not pretend those provisions are without cost to me. They are not. I know exactly what they would cost me because Rhea taught me the price of everything she taught me without exception. He held Zeus's gaze. I am telling you that I would pay it. The silence in the courtyard was not the silence of an impasse. It was the silence of a calculation completing. Zeus turned toward the scorch mark. The motion of his turning had a finality to it. Not the finality of ending, but the finality of deferral, of a man choosing to put something down without resolving it, which was the correct first move from his position, and Harry had expected it. This conversation, Zeus said to the middle distance, is not finished. No, Harry said, but it has begun. Zeus stepped into the scorch mark and the lightning took him, and the sky closed behind him with a sound like a single heavy stone being placed very deliberately on top of another, and the ozone smell was left hanging in the September air like a question that had been set down carefully rather than answered, and the question's shape was, what comes next? Hermione closed her notebook. She looked at the scorch mark, then at the sky, then at Harry. He didn't strike, she said. No, he was going to, not a question. At 2 points, Harry said. The first when I mentioned the account. The second when I said I would invoke the full provisions. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the courtyard with the expression of someone running a retrospective analysis on an experience they were present for but could not fully process while it was happening. What he said about the cost, she said, of invoking the full provisions, that was true. Yes, and you do it regardless. Harry looked at the scorch mark, the black-edged star shape in the gray flagstone, the lightning signature, the evidence of something that had stood here and decided not to act, and that decision being its own kind of power. If they move to neutralize me, he said. Yes. Hermione opened her notebook again. She looked at the page, which was dense with notation. She looked at Harry. Then she closed the notebook a second time, which was a different kind of closing from the first. The first had been the automatic, reflexive closing of someone overwhelmed. This one was deliberate, the closing of someone who has made a decision and does not need the notebook for what comes next. The blood law, she said, the full account, the provisions your archivists, she stopped herself from saying his archivists, Zeus's archivists haven't found. You have access to the original tablets. Yes. And the existing literature on the intersection of divine law and mortal magical law is, she stopped, with the expression of someone locating the correct description. Inadequate. There are 7 texts I know of that touch the boundary, and they're all working from secondary and tertiary sources, and at least 2 of them have fundamental translation errors in the foundational passages. She paused. If the argument for your authority is going to hold, not just against Zeus, against the full council, against whatever the ministry decides to do when they find out what happened in this courtyard today, and they will find out, because 3 Hogwarts students were watching from the tower window and at least one of them will talk, the argument needs to be built properly, coherently, across the full legal and constitutional framework. Harry looked at her. I'm saying, she said, with the slightly impatient precision of someone who has arrived at a conclusion by a different route than usual, and is aware that the route was not entirely rational but has decided to trust the conclusion anyway, that I can be useful. I'm very good at building arguments from primary sources, and I'm very good at finding the things in the existing literature that other people missed. And I have been since approximately the moment you walked into Gringotts, and every goblin in the building stopped working. Entirely, and I think, irreversibly invested in understanding what this is. It will put you in the path of Olympus's attention, Harry said. I know. That is not a comfortable place. I noticed, she said. I was standing in the courtyard. She paused. I'm still here. Harry was quiet for a moment. Tomorrow, he said, I'll start translating the tablets. The foundational passage on the blood law is in a dialect that hasn't been spoken in 4,000 years, but the grammar is internally consistent and I can walk you through the logic of it. He paused. You'll need access to the restricted section. I have access to the restricted section, she said immediately. Of course you do, he said. She looked at him sharply, checking for condescension, found none, and allowed the faintest alteration of her expression, not quite relief, not quite amusement, but something in the territory of both. She opened her notebook a third time and began writing. The suite on the 7th floor was as the castle had prepared it, stone-walled and high-ceilinged and warm in the geothermal way. The walls doing what Hogwarts' very old walls did, which was remember and respond. The window looked east. Harry stood at it for a while after Hermione left, looking at the grounds in the last of the afternoon light, at the place on the flagstones where the scorch mark was still visible as a darker shape in the gray. He thought about the conversation in precise detail, the way Rhea had taught him to review significant encounters, what had been said, what had been underneath what was said, what each party's position had been at the start, and where it had moved to by the end. Zeus had come to assess. He had not found what he expected to find, and the not finding was in some ways more dangerous than a direct confrontation would have been, because it meant he was going back to his council with incomplete information, which meant the council's next move was unpredictable. The account, though. The mention of Rhea's account had done something that the blood law arguments had not. It had touched something real in Zeus, something that was not political and not strategic, something that predated the king entirely. Harry had not used it as a weapon. He had used it as information, the way Rhea would have used it, with precision rather than force, to establish the actual shape of the ground before deciding where to stand on it. He thought about Rhea, about the eastern ridge of Othrys and the deep chamber and the amber fire, about the weight of her hand on his chest in the moment she showed him what had always been his. He put his own hand against his sternum. The warmth was there, as it always was, the deep, geothermal resonance of Othrys, carried in the blood and the bone, further from the mountain now than it had ever been, but no less present for the distance. The mountain was not a place that lost its connection to its stones when they were moved. The mountain knew where its stones were. He sat at the stone table the castle had provided in the center of the room and unrolled the first translation parchment and began to write. And outside the window the light went the amber that was not quite the same amber as the deep chamber's light, but was close enough that something in his chest recognized it. And the castle breathed around him, the warm, slow breath of walls that had been standing for 1,000 years and intended to stand for 1,000 more, and he worked. On the tree line where the forbidden forest thickened at the edge of the grounds, in the gap between two very old oaks where the light came through at the late afternoon angle that turned everything briefly the color of old stone, a figure stood that was not quite shadow and not quite solidity, or was both in the proportion of things that have existed long enough to stop distinguishing between their own substance and the substance of what surrounds them. She had come when the sky broke. She had watched from the tree line. She had not moved. She had watched her grandson stand in a scorch-marked courtyard with the smell of divine electricity still in the air, and speak the blood law in the language she had given him to speak it in. And she had watched Zeus, who had been small enough once to fit inside her hands, who had been the last and most careful of the deceptions she had made against his father, who had grown into the enormous and specific and complicated man that he had become over 3,000 years of being the most powerful person in whatever room he stood in. She had watched him step back, not defeat, not concession, withdrawal to reconsider, which was the only move available from his position, and the fact that Harry had understood the position well enough to make it the only available move, that was what she had built him for. Not to win by force, to win by the superior understanding of the ground. The grief of it and the pride of it were not separable. They had not been separable since she first sat in the stone garden and understood what she was going to do with the child she had carried from a cupboard in Surrey. The grief was specific, the knowledge of what this life would cost him, the knowledge that divine authority is not a gift, and that every time he exercised it, it would take something from him that was specifically human, specifically mortal, specifically his, and that there was no version of this path where he came through it unchanged. She knew this the way she knew everything, from the inside of the stone, from the deep layer where the information lives before it becomes knowledge. The pride was the same specific thing seen from the other side. She watched him turn back toward the castle, watched the mortal girl fall into step beside him, notebook open, already speaking. She liked this girl, found something in her that resonated with the particular quality of people who encounter something far larger than their framework and choose, instead of retreating, to make a larger framework. That was the correct response. That was the only response worth having. She watched the castle receive him, the warm gray walls and the ancient hill and the deep foundation stones that had been waiting in their specific way for the specific resonance that had just crossed their threshold. She felt the hill's recognition from here, felt it the way she felt all geological acknowledgement, as a rumble in her own structure, her own stones vibrating fractionally in sympathy. She had been the keeper of things for a very long time. Children, promises, the memory of a world that no longer existed in any form that could be visited, the grief of a war she had tried to prevent and could not, and the longer grief of a peace that had not remembered to include her. She had kept Harry, and then she had given him back to the world that had tried to erase him, because keeping was not the same as raising, and raising was not the same as releasing. And she had understood from the beginning, from the first night in the stone garden when he sat beside her in the amber dusk without speaking, with his knees drawn to his chest and his eyes on the carved figures, exactly as he had sat in the cupboard, except that here the walls were warm. She had understood that the work was not to make him safe. The work was to make him sovereign. The work was finished. He had taken it from here. She turned from the tree line, and the oaks closed behind her, and the path beneath the forest floor was warm and familiar and very old, and the mountain was ahead of her, and she went back toward it through the deep places, through the roots and the dark and the ancient mineral warmth. And above her, the Scottish sky held its loaded gray with the patience of skies that have learned that the weather will come when it comes, and there is no urgency in the holding. In the 7th floor suite, a lamp was lit. In its light, someone was writing. The stone table held the parchment steady. The window held the night beyond. The castle held the hill, and the hill held the deep stones, and the deep stones remembered everything. And the warmth in the walls was not the warmth of the building, but the warmth of what the building was built on, which was old enough to remember when there were no buildings, only ground, only the patient, enormous fact of the earth holding everything it had been given and giving back nothing it was not asked to return. The lamp burned. The pen moved.